Hi friends, I am taking us through a Roundtrip workflow to pull a image out of your VectorWorks file into Photoshop, paint in Photoshop, or otherwise texture in Photoshop to create a paint elevation, and then bring it back into your VectorWorks file as a texture. So that's today's task. I'm giving you wall A, which is coming out of my scenic drafting package for Yellowface that I'm working on currently. And I'm going to show you how I take it into Photoshop in order to create the whole thing and then pull it back into VectorWorks when I'm ready. So you should have this file. It should be located on Canvas for you. Once you get in there, you should find that there is a wall, right? If I hit Shift-C, and there it is, lovely wall. It has some trim pieces on it, and then it has the main surface, okay? I would have you texture the trim separately, right? So rather than creating a specific texture for the trim, I would go into this symbol and just edit its texture. Let's do that first. No, we'll do that second. So we'll do that at the end. And we'll do that at the end. So first I'm going to pull us into our front view real quick. So we are looking at a flat front view of this project. The first thing I'm going to do is create a viewport on a sheet layer. So I'm going to go to View and create the viewport. I'm going to place it on my 8.5 by 11. I don't need more than that much on it. And I'm going to say okay, right? So here I am on 8.5 by 11. Right now it is in 1/4 inch scale, which is okay, but I might pull it into 1/2 inch scale just to give myself more detail to work with. The other thing that may come about is we may want to look at the DPI, right? The resolution of this page, right? So your raster rendering DPI is 72. If we make it 300, that's a standard high quality print, and that'll allow you to have that additional detail without changing the scale, which is probably worthwhile. When I'm going to export to Photoshop, I actually don't need all of this other business, right? I don't need my title block, and I don't need my drawing label, so I tend to go ahead and delete that stuff just to simplify the piece that I'm working with. So now I just have a viewport of my wall. I will come over to File, and I will say Export, and I will choose Export Image File, right? One of my options there will be Photoshop, right? So I can choose each page as a separate image in order to get that sheet of paper, right? You can also say visible objects, right? And see what that does. That may just give you the one thing, right? And that might be more valuable to us, right? So depending on whether you're working with multiple pieces on a single page or whatever, you can choose which export area makes the most sense. And then the file type I'm going to choose is Photoshop. And then it'll give me a PSD, okay? So let's try this and see how it goes. I'm going to say save. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. I'm going to put it on my desktop. So now I have over on my desktop where you can't see it, wall A, PSD, right? The Photoshop file for wall A. Let's open that up in Photoshop. Oh, perfect, right? So it's already basically cropped around that image. Fantastic. And so now we can come in and apply textures and paint and whatever to our Photoshop version. We'll then be able to export it and pull it back in as a texture on our surface. So the strategy I generally take, my typical approach, right, is to start with the file itself. I like to crop it down, but you don't have to, right? So sometimes I'll grab my crop tool and just drag it to the edges of the image. The other thing that you can do is like put black around the outside, right? So maybe I make it black around the outside. And then the other thing that I'll frequently do in order to not mess up this image, right, is frequently I will go ahead and change its blend mode to multiply, which means that the lines will appear on top of whatever else is underneath it. So I start by changing it to multiply, and then I lock that layer. Okay, so what that means is I can't accidentally mess up my outline, but I can go in and sort of play around with the images underneath it. Then I can add, with this little plus button, new layers, okay? And I can do various kinds of paint treatments on those layers, right? So let's say, again, because I know I have this trim, let's say I want to choose or select a certain amount of this to receive all the same paint treatment. So I'm going to just do like a checkerboard. You can choose whatever makes sense to you. Some of you I know have a lot more Photoshop skills. Yay, wonderful, beautiful, right? So I'm just choosing a checkerboard selection. That'll keep my paint application in those areas. And all of those overlaps, because I've sort of hit in the middle of my trim, will just be hidden underneath the other trim, right? Once I bring it back into VectorWorks as a texture. I like to use brush tools, and there are a lot of really cool ones that are built into Photoshop now. If you use Procreate or another iPad option, this is all available there for you as well. These are just a majillion different Kyle water brushes or watercolor brushes, right? The Wamazing. Let's try that and see what it looks like. I'm going to choose a color, kind of a dark red, and I'm just going to kind of see what that paint looks like. Ooh, not bad, right? It is slowing down my computer because it is a giant paintbrush and it's hitting a lot, but like I can kind of rough in a paint treatment that looks like paint, which I love, and then maybe it's like blended a little bit with kind of a cream color, and maybe I choose a different brush for that, right? I can also change the opacity of this paint that I'm adding, right? So it's not quite so dramatic. Be a painter, do your thing, right? I'm going to undo, Command Z, because I liked the deeper red all by itself. There are also really cool things you can do with what are called blender brushes or spatter brushes. A lot of these are in the wheelhouse of scenic painting, right? So let's say I have, let me find a good, like a little spatter brush, right? That's gigantic. I don't need that big of a spatter. But if I hit I can use my open and close brackets to make my brush bigger or smaller. So then maybe I get somewhere closer to what I want. I don't like that spatter. This is the part where I now have to play around and figure out what I want. There are also pressure control brushes, which you're not going to really see because I'm using a mouse. But if you have a tablet, then you can get various different layers of spatter or different amounts of that brush controlled by your pressure sensor on your tablet. Okay, so that's a kind of basic. I'm using paintbrushes to create paint-like effects. There's a lot of really great opportunity there, and you can learn more about Photoshop brushes through some outside resources too. The other thing I really love to do is actually to use an existing pattern and just tile it. And so I'm going to show you how, for example, this red or maybe this gold fabric, you can just click on it and it makes what's called a pattern fill. I'm going to show you how to do that because I'm actually going to put that in my other squares. Okay, so I like to start a new layer just for my sanity. And then I'll select my alternate squares. I don't know if this is going to be a paint treatment I would ever actually put on a set, but that's okay. So I have all of my squares selected, right? This is where I'm going to end up. But I actually need this pattern, right? Right now I have gold chenille already and I can just drop it in there and there it is. Gold fabric is now on those alternate squares. Let me show you how to get there, okay? Because it's not directly obvious necessarily. So let's say I wanted to make a fabric pattern like this and then be able to use it as a fill. This is also super helpful for costume folk because you can actually use this pattern fill to change the fabrics on your clothing that you draw. So I'm going to actually just create a new file real quick. I love 400 by 400 pixels. That sounds great. Okay. So into this file, I'm going to pull that reference texture, right? This lovely kind of gold chenille. I don't know if I even have it anymore. Hold please. Okay. So I'm going to bring in gold chenille, which is a fabric that I found on the internet, and I took a screenshot of it and I renamed it so I could find it again ever. Let's say that's going to be my pattern, right? I'm going to bring it in, right? I can just drag and drop it into Photoshop. There it is. Right now, it's actually kind of overscaled, I think, for what I want. And so I'm going to kind of scale it down to a texture that feels a little bit more like fabric. I can then, because this is a relatively good and kind of randomized pattern, it doesn't look weird actually tiled. I mean, it's a little weird, but it's not bad. It's not like bad weird. You can sort of clean up the edges of a texture like this and make sure that it doesn't kind of kill the vibe by tiling it. This is actually not terrible, so I'm not going to worry about it in this case. There's another video about that I can give you on how to make a perfectly tiled texture, but we are not going to do that project today. I'm just going to crop it down inside so that the full image is covered in that gold fabric. And then I'm going to use this to define a pattern, okay? And what that will do is it will add this pattern over here into the patterns browser, which may or may not even be available to you. If you don't have it, you can come over here and make sure patterns is selected in your window options. But then once you have that pattern, you can fill any selection with that pattern. So we're going to do this kind of a new version of gold chenille. It's already existing in my, but it's not going to exist in yours. And so I'm going to take this and then I'm going to go over to, I think it's in edit, but who knows? Yes, it is. So down here in edit where it says define pattern, I select define pattern and I give it a name. Okay, so now it appears over here, right? Once I have it, love it, in my file, I can come back over here and with my pattern fill button, I can click on that and now it is filling with that pattern, right? I can have it fill with this pattern. I can have it fill with this weird brick. I can have it fill with that pattern, okay? So now I have both of those elements included on my final image. The next step to bring this back into VectorWorks and add it as a texture, right? You can leave those outlines or you can delete them, and I think it depends on sort of your overall strategy about like how you're trying to achieve your final look. I will typically turn off that layer, right, in order to give myself a nice clean PNG. And then I will go to File and I will export, and I use Quick Export as PNG because I don't need it to be more than just that, okay? Putting it on my desktop for now, and this is Wall A texture PNG, save. So now I have a Wall A texture file, and I'm going to now apply that as a texture to my VectorWorks object, okay? So Wall A texture.png is on my desktop, fantastic. I'm gonna come into my resource manager, right click, new resource, and add a new RenderWorks texture. I know some of you have been doing this all day. And this texture is going to be called Wall A. I'm going to call it TXT because it's not, you're not allowed to use Wall A again, right? Wall A already is an object. We're going to use an image and we're going to go grab our Wall A texture PNG and hit open. Look at that. I love it. It's beautiful. If you have transparency, which this one does, you can add that in this file, right? You can say, I want to use a color or an image as that transparency layer. If that's a thing for you, let me know and I'll help you out with that. We are also going to change set by image size, right? And I'm just going to go from one side to the other of this file. And I'm going to set that to 8 feet because I know that that's how wide this wall is. Cool, great, wonderful. That's it for now. All right, so now I have that texture. Let's go back into my design layer over here, scenery, and let's apply that texture to the correct surface of this guy. So we're gonna double click on him. We're gonna edit our 3D components. You wanna select, I'm gonna just do this so that I can get in there. I wanna select not that front part, but the actual wall itself. Great. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to apply a texture. I have two options actually. I can either apply it to the overall surface or I can use my texture brush. So if I wanted to use my texture brush, I would come over here, I would select the texture that I want, which is this one, and then I would stick it on that surface. You can't see it because I don't have the teapot set to shaded, so I'm going to go do that. And then there it is. Okay. It is not, if you notice, in the correct spot, right? So you may need to come in and adjust that placement, right? So that the overlaps are where you want them. And you do that down here in the offsets. And so let's just say, I don't know, 6 inches, maybe it needs to be more like 1 foot, 6 inches. I'm just trying to get it up to where I need it to be. Oh, I see the problem. I'm rotated incorrectly, right? So because this is so much wider, I actually need to change my rotation to 90 degrees. Then let's change our offset back to 0 and get a little closer. Okay, let's see now if I say, that's the wrong way. Much closer. And you just kind of fiddle with this until it lines up. Maybe -7. I like that. Okay. And then let's try the same thing here. -7. Nope. +7. Cool. That's not bad. It is technically upside down, right? This part would be on the top. So to get it to where I want it, I would flip it all the way over. But I can also use like flip vertically or flip horizontally and get it a little bit closer to where I think that's where it's supposed to be, but it's hard to say. So those are options you have to get your mapping correct. Once I have that happy on that surface, I am going to come in and put a wood texture on my other object here. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this guy, a bunch of different extrudes, and I can change that overall surface to texture, and instead of this texture, I'm going to do some sort of a wood. It's going to download it, and now it has like a wood frame on it. I don't know if that's exactly the wood I want, but it's fine for the purposes of this endeavor. And now I can exit the symbol. I'm back out of shaded view, but when I come back into shaded view, now I have a wall with a wood frame and a specifically painted and textured surface for this project. So that is today's mission goal, is to do some sort of a treatment, ideally using some sort of a paint, possibly also using some sort of a repeated pattern or a pattern fill in Photoshop, and then bring it back into VectorWorks and apply it to that wall. And then your submission can just be, if you want to just have this image like this and export for me an image file, and current view is great. Render just to check to see what we're seeing. It's going to think about that for a minute. So that's into the preview. Perfect. That's all I need. Save. Wall A. And then submit that image. Okay. Let me know if you have questions, and I will see you all around. Thanks, friends. Bye.